Welcome to Resistance Live. Since 2017, Resistance Live has been the go-to home for political and legal news and analysis through a decidedly progressive activist lens. I'm your host, Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin. I'm a former Wall Street and human rights lawyer, a lifelong organizer, and a leadership and impact consultant for all those seeking to lead big progressive change in these incredibly challenging times. To get bonus broadcasts, ask questions, and more, don't forget to become a paid subscriber to the show at patreon.com/resistancelive. And to learn more about what we do to help progressive leaders everywhere, check out GaiaLeadershipProject.com. And now, here's today's show. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the show. It's a Monday, March 2nd, 2026. And over the weekend, we went to war. I know everybody knows this already, but it's been a really crazy 48 hours. So as of this morning, and it's really unfortunate that we have to start with this, but as of this morning, there are 4 U.S. soldiers dead. We do not know their identities yet. There has been a media blackout on that until 24 hours after the next of kin have been notified. But what we do know, which seems to have shocked the Trump regime based on comments from Trump this morning, it hasn't shocked anybody else, is that, of course, as soon as we bombed Iran, Iran retaliated. And that has meant that at least 5 countries where there are United States military bases have now been bombed by Iran. So the assumption is that the 4 soldiers that have died in one of those 5 locations. This is just incredibly disturbing. I actually know people who have historically, they're not there now, fortunately enough, but been stationed in Bahrain, which is one of the locations where there's a huge U.S. naval base that was bombed. And those retaliatory strikes continue. It also is worth noting that all of this happened in conjunction with Israel. There was no other allied involvement in this particular effort other than the U.S. and Israel. And of course, as we all know by now, the supreme leader of Iran was killed in these strikes, along with his wife, at least one of his children, and his grandchild. The other thing that we learned yesterday, which is fairly psychotic, is that there had been some predictions apparently inside the regime of who would succeed the supreme leader. And the U.S. also killed every single one of those folks, and even killed a man who had been the leader of Iran 15 years ago for no discernible reason. So, there have been a lot of discussions in the last 24 hours about who's running the show here. Trump did, of course, announce this war from Mar-a-Lago at 3:00 in the morning on Saturday. I will just tell you all that this appears to be, as with everything else that Trump does, based on some combination of grievance and perceived injustice against him. He did post a very strange thing on Truth Social, claiming that Iran had tried to interfere in the 2020 and 2024 elections. The thing he didn't say, because there is some fact to that, is that they tried to interfere on Trump's behalf. So, everything for him comes down to the idea that he is a victim. Again, I have to point out, Iran does not have a nuclear weapon. We had a treaty with them that Obama signed to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon that Trump backed out of in his first term. There were negotiators at the table. Apparently, what folks have reported since is that Trump just got sick of the negotiations and decided to bomb them. Now, Iran is saying, despite the fact that after bombing Iran, Trump was like, okay, let's go back to the table. Iran's like, no. They've refused that in the last few hours. And there continue to be retaliatory strikes as of this morning. There is literally no exit plan here. Anytime that Trump has been asked what the exit plan is, or one of his minions has been asked what the exit plan is, the answer has essentially been that there is no plan, that they intend to continue for 4 to 6 weeks for God knows what reason. They point to Venezuela, which was a total failure after they removed Maduro from power. And nobody really knows what the agenda is here, other than the fact that it makes Trump and Hegseth feel really good to murder brown people. So I do want to point out from a legal standpoint, what has happened here is per se illegal. Trump said from the very moment that this was announced that this was a war. He did not claim that this was limited strikes. I've heard from some of you this morning who called your Congress people over the weekend that their offices are saying that Trump has limited authorization to conduct limited strikes within 60 days. This is not a limited strike. He has described this as a war. If the United States goes to war, there has to be congressional approval. That is something that is, by the way, required by our Constitution. Now, we all know that, we're at a phase now in the last 10 years of Trump where they don't give a good goddamn about what's legal and what's not. But that said, there is an opportunity here for Congress to actually reclaim authority over this. And that is through the War Powers Resolution that, by the way, has already been introduced by two of our most favorite representatives right now, even though we disagree wildly with one of them, Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie, okay? So there is a pending War Powers Resolution in the House of Representatives. And there were multiple calls over the weekend from both senators and members of the House of Representatives, including, by the way, a couple of Republicans, to call Congress back to vote on the War Powers Resolution. Just this morning, Greg Casari said that the House shouldn't vote on anything until the War Powers Resolution is voted on by the House. So one of the things that I do want to recommend today is that you call your senators and your reps. And if somebody pushes back and says he's got limited authorization for limited strikes, you have to remind them that he's declared war from Mar-a-Lago. They're running a war from Mar-a-Lago, not even with a skiff, but just like a space where they've put up dark drapes. It's crazy. It's crazy. And there was no justification for it. By the way, at the time that they bombed Iran, there was still something up on the White House website claiming that we had previously obliterated all of Iran's nuclear capabilities in prior strikes, and that any reports to the contrary were fake news. This was literally up on the website. So at this point, there's no rationale. There's no exit plan. It is a war, which it means it's a violation of the Constitution and the War Powers Act, and Congress needs to act. Now, for those of you who asked me on the Patreon feed this morning, well, what's really going to happen from a War Powers Act perspective? Okay, one of the things that you need to understand here is that, of course, we can't roll back the clock, okay? We can't stop the bombings that have already taken place. We can't change the fact that we murdered a ton of people. We're going to get to the schoolgirls in a minute. One of the things, though, that can be done is that the administration, at least by a vote on the War Powers Act and the Massie-Khanna bill, can refuse to authorize further strikes. And if Trump acts in violation of that, that's an impeachable offense, okay? Now, one of the things that I got to remind you all of, and again, there has to be a buildup to these things, okay? He's committed to a multitude of impeachable offenses since January of 2025. We know that, right? There have been so many illegalities. There have already been articles of impeachment introduced against him by Al Green multiple times. This is a situation where there is a basis already for filing articles of impeachment, okay? And yet, one of the things that also needs to be built is public support for that and political will, okay? So one of the ways that happens is through things like a War Powers Resolution vote, and also by putting pressure on Congress people and senators. I got to make it really clear to all of you, yes, it is important to call Democratic senators on this, because I saw an interview yesterday with Mark Kelly where Mark Kelly was like, after we found out that the Supreme Leader was dead, which, by the way, is not a justification for a legal war, okay? Again, this is a complex situation. You do not have to endorse what the Iranian government has done to its people to simultaneously argue that Trump should not have done this, okay? The fact that they have a bad leader is not a justification to bomb them, right? Just imagine if the shoe was on the other foot. People have a right to self-determination, okay? So nothing that I'm saying is an endorsement of the Iranian government, okay? But I do want to point out here that people like Mark Kelly, once, we found out the Supreme Leader was dead, suddenly changed their tune on this. So I don't know if I'm going to support the War Powers Resolution. You need to call those people, okay? And in addition to that, it's incredibly important that if you have a MAGA rep or MAGA senators, you call them and give them a piece of your mind. Because, by the way, there was a poll yesterday that shows that only 21% of the American public supported going into Iran. 21%. Okay, that means that 79% of U.S. citizens do not support this effort. And they need to hear from us. Okay, so make your phone calls today. Demand a vote on the Khanna-Massie resolution, Khanna-Massie resolution, and demand that Congress take its power back. And then if you want, you can throw in some noise about how Trump should be impeached for violating the Constitution. Okay, really important. Really important. And, one other thing that I just want to say here, because this is a very complicated situation. Yes, there are people who are celebrating the death of the supreme leader. Yes, there are expats in particular who have been celebrating it. It does not mean that it was the right call. And I got to tell you that, there's a lot of prediction happening in Washington, and Trump's own advisors told him this, that what may end up happening as a result of this is an even more hardline Iranian government, because they had succession plans. They had pre-authorized strikes ready to go in the event that they were bombed and the supreme leader was killed. So one of the things to understand here is that just because there are expats who are happy about the outcome of this does not mean that it's going to get better for people who are living in Iran. And in fact, without a plan, right? And now we have no line of succession because Trump, by his own admission, murdered them all. Things may actually get quite a bit worse. So, we have to be able to hold the complexity of this situation. It is not black and white by any stretch of the imagination, but we as people who are in America absolutely have a choice to make here about whether or not we're going to support a president randomly going into other countries and either kidnapping or murdering their leaders. Okay? That is not something that I could ever support. It's like one of the worst versions of colonial imperialism. So, again, very significant here to make your voice heard on all of this today. Okay, I also just want to point out that the U.S. has now perpetrated war crimes. I know this is not a surprise to anybody who's been following along with this, but as of this morning, there are 160 plus schoolgirls dead in Iran because the U.S. bombed an elementary school. Okay, you are supposed to, in any actions of war, avoid civilian casualties. What we did instead was murder little girls. And one of the things that I want people to think about when you think about this situation is the fact that the United States is always willing to sacrifice children at the hands of fascism and imperialism, right? They don't care that Renee Good's kids are without a mom right now, right? They don't care that kids are starving in this country and going without health care because they've given tax breaks to the rich. They don't care that kids with HIV are dying in Africa because of the end of U.S. aid, right? They sure as shit don't care that they just murdered 160 plus schoolgirls in Iran, all right? So whatever your views are about the Iranian government, I think we should all be able to agree that the United States government perpetrating war crimes is not okay, right? In addition to the fact that this was a wholly illegal action by the Trump regime. All right. So, you got to make your voices heard on this. Hegseth gave a press conference this morning, by the way, which was absolutely insane. Psychopathic, right? All this stuff about like warrior ethos and, sacrifice and, the days of, DEI are over, right? There were like allusions to that, no more woke military. Okay. These are the people who are running this initiative. All right. And they are people who do not know what they're doing. They don't actually even have an education about the Middle East and what's happening in Iran. This morning, 12 minutes before I came on the air, Trump made a statement that the regime was surprised that Iran was bombing other Arab countries. All of them happened to be allies of the United States. Like how you could expect that Iran would not retaliate? They would just simply roll over, right? Maybe they thought, well, it happened in Venezuela and now Venezuela is a hot mess, right? That would just be the result in Iran. It shows that there is like literally no military understanding in this regime of like what that region is about, let alone Iran's capabilities. All right. So again, you can go watch Hegseth's insane presser if you want. He, by the way, was incredibly dismissive toward the families of the 4 soldiers who died, used this language. I mean, it's so revolting, but, claimed that, the air missile defense worked to a certain extent, but a squirter got through that killed these 4 soldiers. To describe it in that language when like 4 U.S. soldiers gave their lives for a totally, wholly unnecessary war is disgusting. And I can't imagine being the parents of those soldiers and hearing the Secretary of Defense speak that way with that kind of callousness about the sacrifice of your own children. I think it's shocking. Okay, for those who are asking about the International Criminal Court, I have to remind you the United States is not a member of the U.S. Criminal Court. However, if we invaded a country that was a member of the U.S. Criminal Court, that country might arguably have jurisdiction. Unfortunately, Iran is also not a member of the ICC. So nobody's going to The Hague for this. We have to kind of like step back from that, all right? But I do want people to understand that there are future potential accountabilities here when this regime is no longer in power. All right. So that brings me to another issue. Tomorrow, there is a huge set of primaries in this country: North Carolina, Arkansas, and Texas. This is going to be our first indicator of where things start to fall in the Democratic primaries as we head toward November. All right. A lot of eyes are on Texas, by the way, because of Tallarico versus Crockett. That's the one that everybody is going to be paying attention to in terms of the Texas Senate race. All right. But I want to just remind everybody that, part of the thing that's happening right now is, are we electing centrists or are we electing progressives? And I think the question right now, there's going to be a lot of an indication of the way that the Democratic electorate is going to go based on tomorrow night's results. So obviously, if you live in Texas, you live in Arkansas, you live in North Carolina, make sure you get out and vote. But we're also going to have some really interesting indicators of what's to come in November and how people are feeling. Like, I already kind of know where this is going because, Annalila Mejia is about to be my rep here in New Jersey. Crazy, right? Nobody thought she stood a chance. She's like one of the few people who's called Gaza a genocide from the candidates that were running in the primary here. She also thinks that Alito and Thomas should be impeached. Nobody thought she was going to get elected, and she did it in the primary. So she's, running. We have another special election later on in the spring. But all that said, we've got a lot of key indicators right now that Democrats are swinging left, and that's really good. All right. So that's coming up tomorrow, and there's going to be a lot of eyes on that. Okay, I have to answer a question that came up a bunch of times on the Patreon feed this morning, and I just have to make this really clear because there's an enormous amount of disinformation about this right now, including from big accounts. The elections cannot be canceled because Trump invaded Iran, okay? Here's where this confusion seems to stem from. In Ukraine, there is a law that says if Ukraine is at war, elections cannot take place. This is one reason why President Zelensky has been the president of Ukraine through the entire Russian-Ukrainian war, okay? That is not the law of the United States. And again, I have to remind you all that there are 3,144 counties or county equivalents in the United States, each one of which is responsible for administering elections, both state, local, and federal. All right. Trump can't randomly decide, I've created a war, therefore there's no midterms. Okay. That cannot happen in the US system of law. All right. Again, I have to remind you, there are people out there, including good people, but people who are doing this nonetheless, who are churning for subscriptions to their newsletters and their Substacks and their YouTube channels by claiming somehow that we should all be terrified that the elections are going to be ended. Okay. Again, I did a whole broadcast on this 2 weeks ago, and it's really important to understand that there is not going to be an opportunity for Trump to stop the midterm elections because we are at war. All right. That simply is not possible under our system of government and the way elections are administered in this country. It would require the consent of every blue state governor, blue state attorney general, blue state county. It's not going to happen. Okay. So everybody can take a big breath. All right. We had elections during World War I and World War II, right? We had elections in the Vietnam War. We had elections in the Korean War. We had elections in Gulf War I and Gulf War II. And here we are at Gulf War III, the third one in my lifetime. All right. We're going to have elections. Okay. All right. A couple other things I just want to mention here. I continue to struggle with the people who are like, this is all a distraction from Epstein. Because let me just say this, when we're murdering brown people in the Middle East, that is not a distraction. But claiming this is a distraction actually diminishes the value of those lives. All right. It is a dehumanizing thing. Okay. Trump did not start this war because he doesn't want people talking about the Epstein files. The Epstein files are not going away. All right. They're not going away. There was breaking news yesterday, front page of the New York Times about Epstein's ranch in New Mexico. More on that in a second. Okay. He's not going to be able to evade this by murdering people. Okay. That's the first thing. The second thing is that the thing about fascism, there's a question that reflected this totally accurately this morning on the Patreon feed that was like, this is happening, this is happening, this is happening, this is happening. Here's this other horrible thing. And ICE is still in the streets of America, and people are still getting kidnapped, and they're getting deported to third-party countries, and we're building new concentration camps. Yes, this is fascism. This is how it works. They are flooding the zone. Okay, it's total Gish Gallop technique. It doesn't mean anything is less important or less significant than anything else. And one of the things that I need people to remember here is that as much as Trump wants to escape liability, he also is a sadistic fascist. And that means that he doesn't care that US citizens were gunned down in Minneapolis and Los Angeles, right? He doesn't care that Liam Ramos was kidnapped to a concentration camp in Texas, right? He doesn't care that the Dilley concentration camp currently has a measles outbreak and a tuberculosis outbreak right now. That literally, like, it's a concentration camp where kids are so sick that they are having to be hospitalized as non-responsive. He doesn't care. Okay, it's everything at once. All right. And it's really important to not fall for like, this is all a distraction from the Epstein files kind of stuff. Okay. The lives of 160 plus schoolgirls in Iran that are gone, whose parents loved them as much as we all love our own kids and grandkids, they are not a distraction. Those families are grieving, just like all the families in Gaza who have lost their children, right? So it's very important to mind your language about this, okay? Not everything can be reduced to sex trafficking crimes. And there are a lot of commentators out there who would like that to be the case because it drives views to their channels to talk about something salacious, all right? It's a lot less sexy to talk about dead schoolgirls and bloody backpacks in Iran. So please be very mindful of the way that you talk about all of this, okay? Speaking of Epstein, I want to talk about the news that was in the New York Times yesterday about Epstein's ranch. You can go read this piece if you would like to, but I mentioned this multiple times last week. I'm sure I will again this week. There continue to be developments out of the Epstein files because 3 million pages is an enormous amount of materials to go through. All right. Like last week, we just learned that Howard Lutnick had been in touch with Epstein until a few months before his death, despite claiming that first he hadn't spoken to him since 2005. Then he hadn't spoken to him since he took his kids and nannies to lunch at the island in 2012. Right. There was, by the way, a photograph of him on the island with Epstein that didn't seem to have any kids or nannies in it last week. Then there's this news story now about the Zorro Ranch. Okay. So it's since been renamed, but the Zorro Ranch was a property that Epstein bought a long, long time ago, actually. And the rumor is, the suspicion is, based on the reporting in the New York Times, that he bought this land in New Mexico, this ranch in New Mexico, because New Mexico has lax sex offender registration requirements. They do not require the registry of sex offenders in the way that most states in this country do. On top of it, he bought adjoining land. This is like a 30,000 acre ranch. He bought adjoining land to create even more privacy. Okay. And there were multiple complaints. Again, this is the story of how this has all gone down. There was another story in the New York Times, by the way, about the FBI dropping the ball multiple times, despite complaints going all the way back to like 1996 about Epstein. You should go read that. It's really sad. But the other thing is there were complaints about Epstein's ranch multiple times through like the 2010s and up until the point where Epstein died and even afterwards. And New Mexico authorities tried to get the FBI involved, never heard anything back, opened their own investigation, then closed it in December 2019 after Epstein's death. The ranch itself has never been searched, and now it's been sold to somebody else. However, as we talked about last week, there's now a new commission that has been started in New Mexico, a truth commission, to investigate what took place at the Zorro Ranch. And that includes, by the way, the potentiality of subpoenas and a criminal investigation by the state of New Mexico. One of the caretakers at the ranch apparently reported, again, I got to tell you, I'll take this with a big grain of salt because there's no evidence of it so far, but that there may be 2 bodies of dead girls buried on the ranch property in the hills outside of the main property. Okay. So we don't know where this is going, but the key feature of all of this is that multiple law enforcement institutions, as was the case in New York, as was the case in Florida, thanks to the federal intervention that got that sweetheart deal, dropped the ball. And, one of the things that I think we're going to have to reckon with as we continue to deal with potential accountability for co-conspirators is the fact that there were witnesses speaking up literally for 30 years about this stuff. And somehow he didn't ever manage to get stopped. I had a moment when I was reading the article from Saturday where they interviewed the woman who filed the first complaint in 1996. When Epstein stole photographs that she had taken for purposes of figure studies that she had done for her art class. They were pictures of her 12 and 16-year-old sisters in states of undress. She herself did not do anything wrong. This is part of a creative project, and they were private photographs, and Epstein stole them. And she called the FBI and she was working for Epstein at the time. She called the FBI and said, I think he's a pedophile and you need to investigate him. And nothing ever came of it. So there's a whole series of implications here about how law enforcement did not respond to complaints about Epstein to begin with. I had a moment, like I was about to say on Saturday, where I was like, just imagine if he had been stopped 30 years ago. The country would be completely different. We wouldn't have had the conspiracy between Bannon and Epstein to overthrow all sorts of democracies worldwide, right? We wouldn't have had this kind of nexus of incredibly powerful billionaire men conspiring to interfere in governments and elections, right? Not to mention victimizing more than 1,000 girls. So there's quite a lot of developments starting to come out here, and we're going to have to see what happens in New Mexico. The current owner of the ranch has said that he will cooperate with subpoenas if they are issued. Yes, he is trying, as many are mentioning in the comments, he's going to turn it into some kind of Christian retreat property. That doesn't mean, by the way, that, like he's digging up the potential bodies of girls on the property. It does mean that, the feds and New Mexico are going to need to move quickly if they want to reopen this investigation and get somewhere on it. Okay, that's it for today. Lots of breaking news, ongoing news. Just a word of, caution to all of you. All right. And I mentioned this on the Patreon feed on Saturday after the bombing of Iran started. And I just want to mention it here because I meant to repost it on YouTube and I didn't. A lot of what's happening right now, especially on the international sphere, is kind of outside of our control. Yes, we can advocate to our members of Congress and our senators to vote in favor of the Massey-Connor resolution. Yes, we can insist that the War Powers Act should be enforced. Yes, we can demand impeachment. But we're not going to be able to stop Trump and his cadre of sociopaths from engaging in further violence using weapons of mass destruction. All right. The reason why I say this is that it is incredibly important to take care of yourself during these kinds of times. All right. It doesn't, I said this on Patreon on Saturday. I'm going to say it here again. It does not serve anyone to be doom scrolling or tuned into the news 24/7 right now. There's a lot of really terrible footage, by the way, circulating on social media about that elementary school that was bombed. I urge you to avoid it at all costs. Like I saw something on Saturday that I really wish I hadn't seen that was forced upon me by the timeline on Blue Sky. There is no need to subject yourself to horrors, to experience bystander trauma, which, by the way, can produce PTSD. You can fight for justice and goodness in this world without exposing yourself to the horrors of what the regime and Israel are doing right now. Okay. So please make sure that you take a break. Please make sure that you are managing your own central nervous system reactions. Make sure that you are doing things that connect you to the immediacy of this moment. All right. For the people who are concerned about retaliation, like I see this coming through in the comments, I'm just going to say this. We have no control over that. Okay. And there have already been retaliations against Americans in the Middle East. Is it possible? Like there was a shooting in Austin over the weekend where there are some indications that may have been tied to Trump bombing Iran. We don't know for sure. Okay, I got to remind you, the FBI is supposed to be investigating that while Kash Patel is flying all over the world to see his girlfriend perform and celebrate with the Olympic hockey team. He's not doing anything on this front. One of the things that I just want people to remember is that there are plenty of places around the world where people are subjected to terroristic threats every day. All right. The chances are extremely slim here in the United States right now that you going about your daily life are going to be subject to a terrorist attack. Nothing is without risk. This is the era that we're living in. We have crazy people at the helm. Nothing is without risk. By the way, we have a video coming tomorrow about how to deal with fear and still take action as an educational video. So I'm just going to say something here today that you're going to hear again tomorrow. All right. There is no zero risk option right now. Okay. But you can take care of yourself. You can continue to take action to benefit your neighbors who are marginalized and vulnerable. If you are a marginalized and vulnerable person, you can seek out safety and support. Okay. You can do things to stay connected to other human beings that will lessen the sense of isolation and fear. All right. This is all really, really, really important right now. Okay. And it's also really important to center the people who are the most vulnerable, right? The people who are the most vulnerable right now, by the way, let's not neglect this, are civilians in Iran that we've murdered or that are currently under threat because the United States continues to bomb. And as of this morning says there's 6 more weeks of this shit, at least. And they have no exit plan, right? Center the people who are truly in harm's way And remember that, our responsibility as members of participatory democracy and people who care and are empathetic is to take action in ways that seek to ameliorate the harm that this regime is perpetrating. And one of the ways that you can do that, by the way, just going to remind you all, mutual aid, doing work for your vulnerable and marginalized neighbors, rapid response against ICE. If you want to make donations to organizations that are supporting Iranians, I don't have a list of those yet, but there's certainly going to be a bunch of those running around. Okay. Those are all things that you can do that are in a positive direction. It serves no one to constantly doom scroll or watch the news or spiral into hypotheticals about how there's going to be retaliation inside the United States. We have no control over that. Okay. Our best use of time right now is in service to other human beings who need help. All right. So that's my final thought for today. Lots of love to all of you. Please take care of yourselves. Take care of one another. I will be back here on Wednesday at regular time. We do have an educational video, as I mentioned, coming tomorrow about how to cope with fear and take action anyway. Really important video. We recorded it before the war in Iran started, but I watched it again this morning. We've got a lot of really good information in there about how to make decisions in your activism in the face of fear. So please make sure you tune into that tomorrow as well. I'll share it in the posts of this YouTube channel, and it'll also be over on our main YouTube channel for the Ripple Effect Institute. That's at Ripple Effect Institute on YouTube. Please don't forget to like this broadcast, subscribe, become a subscriber at patreon.com. If you want to ask me questions, you want to get bonus shows every week, we would love to have you over there. I will see you all live again on Wednesday. All right. Take care, everyone. Bye. That's our show for today, folks. Thanks so much for being here at Resistance Live. To get more out of the show, including bonus broadcasts, the answers to all your most pressing political and legal questions, and way more, head on over to patreon.com/resistancelive and become a paid subscriber. And don't forget to hit subscribe here on your favorite podcasting platform to make sure that you never miss an episode. See you next time.